I would remind you that extremism in the defense of liberty is no vice. Also, that moderation in the pursuit of justice is no virtue.
One of the problems, not specifically on this issue, just in general, let's put it this way: money trumps peace sometimes. In other words, commercial interests are very powerful interests throughout the world. And part of the issue in convincing people to put sanctions on a specific country is to convince them that it's in the world's interest that they forego their own financial interests. And, John, that's why sometimes it's tough to get tough economic sanctions on countries. And I'm not making any comment about any particular country, but you touched on a very interesting point. So therefore, we're constantly working with nations to convince them that what really matters in the long run is to have the environment so peace can flourish.
All right, it's 25 minutes before the hour on the Laura Ingraham Show. Go to the website, lauraingraham.com. New online poll is about whether you're worried or not about China's economic and military rise. Joining us now to talk about all of this, all things political, Tony Snow, my friend, U.S. star now across the country, and, of course, press secretary over at the White House. Tony, great to have you with us.
Good to be here. Thanks, Laura.
Tony, the Chinese premier, ABC News is reporting, has said that democracy is 100 years away. They have no plans to allow democracy in China because they have to focus on economic development before any political reform. Does that worry the White House, that all this economic engagement that we've been doing with China, all these people have been telling us that that's going to open up China, and it doesn't seem like that's happening? It seems like the state leaders are becoming more powerful in the state.
Well, I'm not going to get involved in a debate, especially regarding comments by the Premier of China, other than to point out that the President is somebody who's been committed from the start to a freedom agenda, which means democracy, and we continue to think that that's the proper course for all nations.
So you're not worried then about a China that becomes as militarily powerful as it is today?
Again, well, look, I think what you've got to ask yourself is, what is the natural consequence of growing prosperity? And there's pretty clear record about it around the world, but I'm not going to get myself into a diplomatic swivel at this juncture.
Let's talk, Tony, about what happened with the market. Obviously, the European markets, Asian markets, still in a major slump after the sell-off that took place on Tuesday. What is the White House attributing this to?
They're not even going to try. Look, you got to keep in mind, let me try to give you a little perspective. The Chinese market's up about 100% over the last year. It fell 9% yesterday, recovered 4% or so today. Our market fell 3% yesterday. As of now, although I'm not going to predict where it's going to be at the end of the day, it's up. The global economy is as strong as it's ever been. U.S. economic fundamentals are incredibly strong. So really, looking most narrowly at U.S. economic strength, and we remain the global powerhouse. And one of the real points of emphasis for this administration is to make sure we stay that way. Fiscal discipline, and making sure that we keep tax cuts in place, engaging in the proper sorts of free trade to build even greater economic competitiveness. All of those things are at the top of the president's agenda. And the fact is, we do our business right, we're going to continue to be the world leader economically.
But you wouldn't think then, though, that China would be content with allowing the U.S. to be the world's sole superpower, given how it's growing its economy.
Well, it's a fact. Well, number one, you keep trying to engage me into what amounts to a fight about China, and I'm
It's a legitimate discussion, though,
especially since the conversation at least was laid out as we were going to talk about Iran and Syria. So
the White House doesn't dictate what I talk about on my show, of course. We get into all issues, Tony, but this is a major, major issue with the United States.
But you also understand that I'm not going to conduct diplomacy.
No, I didn't say.
Admire you and love you.
Yeah.
You're not the person that I'm going to conduct diplomacy with.
Oh, okay, Tony. No, we'll get on to all the important issues that the White House thinks are the most important for American people. All right. Let's talk about...
Wait. Let's put back the snark weapon. Are you kidding me here? Of course it's important to people, but what you're asking me to do something is something you know is completely inappropriate for his press secretary to do. So don't try to put me in a box just because it looks...
China is growing militarily and economically at an unbelievable pace. I think it's a legitimate point to raise with the Bush administration. Is it something that is of concern? Yes or no? And if you think that's diplomatic, it's not diplomatic. It's a question.
So what you've asked me is specific questions about specific issues. I've already told you, we think we need and we have the ability to maintain economic preeminence. Well, I've also told you that we think that the freedom agenda is the way to go.
It's China more free today than it was.
And this is where you're now getting into diplomatic terrain.
No, it's not.
It is, yeah, it is. Sure. Okay. You know what? It is, and you know it.
All right. Well, I don't think it is. Even Google is admitting they can't get internet sites up in China that are not, of course, going to be monitored or shut down. So we'll let you get off on this one, Tony. But let's. Back on the Laura Ingraham show. China is a major league issue. And the libertarians might want us all to think that everything's going to be huggy-huggy, kissy-kissy with China because they're making so much money in China. So many of these businesses are doing what? They're sending their people over there. They're building hotels. They're building shopping malls. Well, good for them. But that doesn't mean it's necessarily good for America. And I have to just go back to my conversation with Tony Snow on this. The White House and Republicans have got to be realistic in their dealings with China. It doesn't mean that you're unnecessarily picking a fight, provoking. That's not what I'm talking about. But when you have what is an emerging China dominance in Asia and perhaps around the world, you saw what they were doing a couple of weeks ago in Africa with Sudan. Why is China such a presence in Sudan now? Why do you think? Why do you think China believes that Africa is important to its growth? The oil there and clearly economic opportunities and strategic opportunities. And if we can't talk about China at this point, then we're in trouble. Because they're talking about this. And even some of the dinosaur media today is writing about how China's stock market is totally disconnected from the reality of the marketplace because they have this situation with their currency that they don't tie it to economic factors. They don't float their currency in China. Why? Because the state doesn't want to. They still want to do it. They have their state-owned businesses, the People's Liberation Army, that's all chugging forward. The Christians keep getting thrown in jail. The reformers get hassled. Google, doing its Googling over there, gets a lot of its websites blocked. People are thrown in jail if they're trying to get on websites that they're not supposed to be on. So you're telling me that China is more free? China is more powerful. The state is more powerful in China. China is no more free in the year 2007 than it was in the year 2000. And I would argue that it's actually less free. And it is not a foregone conclusion that if China becomes more economically powerful, that China will become freer. China is telling us that they're not looking at democracy for the next 100 years. Hello? 100 years. Put that on Bloomberg.com. I'm fucked off now. And Tony knows this business. And he's been a radio host. He's a host at Fox News. He always tried to get people to talk about issues they don't want to talk about. And when someone says, well, I thought we were talking about Iran, that's when you know you're in trouble. Oh, we'll talk about that diplomacy in Iran, but we won't talk about diplomatic issues with China. Come on. I can't. We're going to take a break. I'll squeeze in some calls. Let's do rapid.